Hey, everybody, welcome to a brand new week of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I got through the title quicker today. I'm on my game, friends. I'm on my game. And I have to be today because I'm solo today for a couple of days, I think. We'll do a couple of solo shows. We had a lot of guests over the last 2.5 weeks on the show. I want to do a quick shout out to all of them here as we open up this Monday, June 10th edition of the podcast. So in chronological order, thank you to Josh Lloyd, Dan Palio, Matt Smith, Dan Titus, Raphael Johnson, Mike Barner, Alex Rickleen, Mike Catron, Keith Cork, Jacob Dunn, Noah Rubin, Adam Stock. And then at some point here, coming up, we will chat with Robin Marks of Believe in Fantasy Basketball and Zach Hanshoe of Roto World as well. Those are coming up on the pod. When he's done moving his family, which has many children now, I don't know if you guys knew this, the great Rhett Bauer, one of, if not the best dynasty minds in fantasy basketball and a longtime pal, worked with Rhett for 3 years, I think, at Sports Ethos. We'll get him on the show as well. That should be in probably about 2 weeks or so. Also, with the NBA draft, about, 16-ish days away. It's a 2-day draft this year. It starts on Wednesday, the 26th of June. In the week and a half or so leading up to the draft, we'll talk to some folks that can actually tell us what young players we should be eyeballing. I know. I don't pay attention to these guys, but other people do. And you guys should get to hear from them because who knows? Maybe there will be some big men that we can target because that's our stance now. Remember, don't draft rookies unless they're a rookie big man who can make free throws or some of their free throws. Doesn't have to be all of them, but it's got to be more than zero. Hello to those watching live. It is a YouTube only live going forward. Hopefully everybody got that message late last week. I'll keep spreading the news on Twitter at Dan Besbris. Of course, please do take a moment to follow at Old Man Squad on Twitter. That's the feed that not only has episodes of this show, but also episodes of all of the other shows in the Old Man Squad Sports Network. And I'll give you a little bit of update on those as we get to later in the program. As far as today goes, we're talking guards. We're talking the Old Man Squad from this last year. And believe it or not, there were only 6 guards in the regular list. There were a couple of guards in other lists because the Old Man Squad, remember, had like the main list. It had the totals guys. It had the games cap guys. We already talked about the failure that was Chris Paul's health this year and the games cap darlings. There's 2 more guards in the totals department, but we'll do a show on the totals guys later on. So we'll kind of separate those guys out. So in the main board, which was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21, 22 names deep. Only 6 of those guys were what you'd call traditional guards. Those 6 names are Kyrie Irving, Tyrese Maxey, Tyus Jones, Klay Thompson, who I guess you could call a wing, but we'll downgrade him to guard because he was the shooting guard for the Warriors. So that's how we're going to treat him here on the show. DeAnthony Melton and Mike Conley. Those are the 6. So not many, mind you. But the nice thing here is that by and large, the hit rate on these guys was pretty good. And the ones that didn't were mostly because of injury. Not all the way, but mostly. Let's go through them one by one on today's show and figure out how we kind of got to this endpoint. And then, are there any takeaways? Is there anything we can learn specifically from the ones that missed, but also from the ones that hit? Did they hit because of something we got right? Did we get lucky? All that good stuff. Starting at the top, Kyrie Irving, who had an ADP of 14 this last year. And that was one of those magical ones where every time it seemed like it was going to go up, it never went up. I had Kyrie ranked with a per game expectation of number 9, a totals rank of number 11, but that's because I thought he was going to play like 65, 66 games. Unfortunately, he only got to 58 games this year. And the reason I say that's a real shame is not just because he didn't get as many games under his belt as we might have wanted, but because I actually got the per game rank right on the nose. 9 was his final per game rank this year, at least according to Basketball Monster, which is where I typically get my ranks. He was behind Embiid, Shea, Jokic, AD, Luka, Wemby, Kawhi, and Spida, Donovan Mitchell, and he was right in front of Halliburton, KD, and Paul George. So we got the number 9 right. We did not get the totals number right, however, because Kyrie didn't play in enough games. He was number 27 by totals, so to that end, he didn't quite make it. If you're playing in a games cap format and you drafted him early in the second round, he didn't really break your team. It was not perfect, but he ended up as an early third by totals, so meh. And then per game, he actually ended up above that. So again, if you were in a games cap format, you could just plug in 24 games from someone else in that roster slot, and it worked out generally okay. He didn't end up as the best player drafted around 14 this year, but he also was far from the worst. If you think about the other guys that were collected in that area, like LaMelo Ball was way worse. Interestingly, Donovan Mitchell was 4 or 5 slots behind him because he actually played in even fewer games than Kyrie. Ant beat him because Anthony Edwards played in 79 ball games, but in a games cap format, Kyrie would have been better. Because with Anthony Edwards, you used up 79 out of your 82 games at that roster slot. With Kyrie, you only used up 58. So Kyrie plus 24 fill-ins was way better than Anthony Edwards plus 3 fill-ins. Dame went earlier than that. Actually, he ended up as number 19 by totals. He was healthier than I realized this year. Scratch that one. Although Dame went like 3-4 slots earlier, whatever that's worth. Trae Young ended up much worse. He didn't go all that far behind Kyrie. Booker beat him. So what's the lesson to learn here? Well, it's kind of a lesson that, frankly, we probably should have already known, which is that Kyrie Irving is not a safe play to make his way through an entire NBA season. And he hasn't in forever. Kyrie's been in the NBA for what, 13 years, something like that right now? The last time he got anywhere near 85 to 90% games played in a season was 2016. 16-17, his last year in Cleveland. He went to Boston, missed 22 games, then 15, which was like mostly acceptable. Went to Brooklyn, got hurt, missed 52 games. Refused to get vaccinated, missed about 30 games. Wasn't that the next one? Or was the one after that? Missed 28 that one. Then he missed 50. Dallas, Brooklyn, the split year, he missed 22. This year, he missed 24. There's a theme. Missing 15 was the best case scenario, and that was in Boston. That's more than a half decade back. That's 2018, 2019. Since Boston, and I mean, we're like really now trying to give all the benefits of the doubt to Kyrie. It's really since Cleveland. Since Cleveland, the best he's done is playing in about 80% of his team's games, and much more frequently, it's closer to 70%. Which is basically what this year was. He was right around 70%. 8.2, 10% of a season, he missed 24 games. So he was just shy of missing 24.6. Previous year, he missed 22. So again, we're close. You're at like 26, 27% of games missed. 73, 74% played. That's the expectation with Kyrie. 3/4 of a season is basically a win right now. So, unfortunately, in a season where a lot of the old beat up guys were actually more durable this year, with Anthony Davis playing 76 and Durant 75 and Kawhi 68, and where the hell are you at, Paul George? Paul George 74. This is simply Steph Curry 74. He wasn't great, at least by Steph standards. Dame 73. The list goes on and on. So when you take those guys and bump them up from low 60s to high 60s, even mid 70s, Kyrie gets pushed farther down the board. My assumption, and the Mavs are in the finals, so I don't know what sort of hangover effect that might have on Irving next year. My assumption is that Kyrie's probably going to get drafted relatively close to the same spot again next season. And if you draft him, you should expect about 60 games played. And anything above that, you should consider gravy. 60 games played for Kyrie gets him basically to the back of the second round. He was 58 this year. If he played in 2 more games, he probably would have been number 26 or 25. Second, third round turn. He's not going to fall that far. In Roto, with a games cap, it's not that big of a deal. You fill in those extra games, his slot ends up being pretty valuable because, late first rounder on a per game basis, those are guys that you want to have on your team. Head to head, I don't think you can draft him because he hasn't gotten close. He hasn't gotten close to a reasonable quantity of games played in forever. But sometimes you got to kind of take those swings. You got to shoot the moon a little bit. If you're in a 30-team lead, sometimes you just need a first-round guy. Like if you have the 16th, 17th pick in a 30-teamer, you got very weird choices on your hands. Do you think you have any shot to win it if you take Domantas Sabonis there? By totals, he was pretty good this year. Is it enough per game? You know your league better than I do. Reminder, by the way, everyone, if you're taking in this show for the first time on the new feed, it's a new feed. You may have found me and not even realize that you're watching a new Dan Besbris fantasy basketball feed. So please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, click that thumbs up button, click the subscribe button. It's the easiest damn things on earth. YouTube did a nice job to make it super easy to like and subscribe to stuff. Spotify seems to be growing in popularity these days. For the longest time, it was like 10 to 15% of all pod listeners were Spotify, and now it's creeping up into that 18 to 25 range. They've done a good job of making things easy. Also making it easy to listen to Spotify stuff if you're not on mobile or if you're on some other device. So shout out Spotify. Anyway, however you're taking in the show, please do take a moment to subscribe. And if you have a chance to piddle on over to Twitter at Dan Besbris to share whatever tweet I may have put out about today's show, usually a couple of them as time goes. So thank you for all of that. Appreciate you guys coming on over and finding the old man squad. Second name on the board was Tyrese Maxey. That one is one that I think we should all feel pretty damn happy about because Tyrese Maxey finished this year at number 22 by totals and basically that same mark on a per game basis. He played 70 games this year, which was back to being, thank the good Lord, pretty much the expectation now. I mean, during the COVID years, it had dropped to like 67 games and change, 67 and whatever. Maxey, 21 per game, 22 by total. So, at least at the top of the board, the average number of games played was kind of in that 70, 71 range. That's better than it has been. Is that the 65 game rule kicking in and bringing up some of the stragglers? I don't know. Maybe it's just the league settling back into a nice little October to April pattern, not disrupted by COVID, not disrupted by weird schedule or 72 game years or shorter off seasons or whatever. Or maybe it's just dumb luck. Either way, games played a little bit better this year. Maxey had an ADP of 58. 58 when I put the old man squad together. And as bullish as I might have been on him, I wasn't even remotely close to bullish enough. I thought his per game mark would be near 40 and his totals rank would be near 34. And he bopped those by a round and a half, basically on per game and by a full round, even a little bit more than that by totals. But either way, we liked him, and it worked. Going forward, however, I don't know that we can make the call to take the maxi plunge again. Because, look, I'll be honest with you guys. I don't know that it gets any better than what we saw this season for Tyrese. Joel Embiid missed a bunch of time. Maxi slowed considerably as the season went on. In particular, was his field goal percent that suffered. So then the question kind of becomes, who's the real Maxi? Because he went from 43% from downtown for 2 years in a row to 37%. And that was a big reason why, because he was taking about 40% of his shots from three-point range. Each of the last 2 years, it's been relatively consistent in that marker. It was a little bit lower as a percentage 2 years back. But this year and last year, almost exactly 40% of his shots were three-pointers. So you take that down by 6%, and his overall shooting should come down by, whatever fuzzy math that thing on the fly. You say about half his shots were 6% less, so the whole thing should come down by about 3%, and that's basically what it did. There was a slight downtick from 2-point percent, but it wasn't as substantial. Most of the big issue here for Maxi was that his three-pointers weren't dropping. So then you kind of have to ask yourself, okay, well, is this a thing that can bounce back? Or were the 2 previous years the more anomalous ones? And frankly, is Maxi a guy that we actually prefer plays alongside someone like a Joel Embiid as opposed to being the sort of lone wolf that had to take 23, 25? There was a game in there where he took 41 shots against San Antonio. Yeah, he scored 52 points, but good God, 41 shots. That's a wild number. Do we want Maxi taking 20 shots a ball game? I think the simple answer is yes. More is better. But is this one of those scenarios where instead of taking 23 shots a game, maybe it's better for him to take 19? I think the good probably outweighs the bad if you have a little bit more usage in there. The thing I'd be worried about with Maxi, and we can't really know, at least not for another 1 to 2, 3, 4 months, something like that, is whether or not the Sixers are going to bring in a third actual high usage guy. I'm not talking about frickin' Tobias Harris. I'm talking about like a Paul George or a Jimmy Butler. That certainly changes things. What I don't know, and we talked to some folks here on the pod last week that brought up the very early mock draft going on right now. I think they're interesting maybe for this reason and this reason alone, to find out where someone like a Maxi would go if nothing changed from right now. And he went 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. He went to 21 in that way too early mock draft. I forget who was talking about it on the podcast last week. One of the guests was bringing up the very early mock draft. If Maxi's going at 21, I think I'm probably out. Because I just don't see a viable path for him to be all that much ahead of where he was this year. Other than, this is the one path, other than he does basically every single thing the same, but the percentages go back up to 48 field goal percent and, 42, 43 from downtown. Because if he keeps taking 20 shots and the 6 assists stick and the 3 and some odd rebound stick and the 1.5 defensive stats stick, which I don't know, man. The half a block, he had 0.4 blocks 2 years ago, but then he had 0.1 last year. The half a block this season felt, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it sticks. Blocks have been somewhat unpredictable for Maxi. It would have to be the percentages. They would have to just bounce right back to where they were the previous year, which is possible because then his 21 ranked from this season jumps up probably by 4 or 5 slots. And now you've got kind of a mid second rounder instead of a late one, early mid. Like maybe he jumps up to number, I don't know, 16 instead of 21. Does the increase in percentage, does that equate to more scoring? I don't know. So 21 to me is about the earliest I would consider Maxey. I think you've wiped out most of his value. Not all, but most. You give yourself very little wiggle room. And then certainly if they make a change and bring in another usage guy, then you probably see that early draft position fall off a little bit. Next name on the board was Tyus Jones, who was, frankly, a little bit of a mixed bag this year because he, like so many others on the Wizards, got off to a terrible start. But as you may recall, 20 games into the season, we hand tallied it. Counted by hand. That's right. I counted 20 games, and the Wizards were involved in blowouts in 11. 11. It's crazy. What that meant, and apologies for the brief stoppage there, what that meant was that Tyus Jones, in particular, wasn't playing the fourth quarter. The way his rotation set was going, he was play the first 7 or 8 minutes of the first quarter and the last 7 or 8 minutes of the second quarter. Same thing in the second half. So he was stuck at about 22 to 24 minutes per game in 11 of those 20 ball games. And he got up to, 28 to 32 in the other 9. And if you were able to isolate those 9 ball games, he was rolling near a top 50, 60 clip. But overall, he was around the edge of the top 100 because 55% of his games, he only got to play 3 quarters of it. And they were often getting blown out. They weren't decimating other. I think one of them was like a winning blowout mixed in there. So even it was like a double whammy. Even in the games he was playing 3 quarters, like, 3 quarters of a game, you might be able to get something out of a guy. They were getting smacked around, so everybody stunk. No one was making any shots. They were letting Jordan Poole run a bunch of the offense, and so Tyus Jones, his numbers were sort of doubly depressed by the fact that he was only playing 3 quarters of a game and also against in a bad situation. And then, not surprisingly, the Wizards started to play a little bit better, or even if you don't think they played better, everybody else started to play worse because it was the middle of the season. It's the dog days. Teams were like, oh, Washington's bad. 20 games in, the other teams in the league pointed to the Wizards and said, that's a game we can take a breather in. And so the Wizards started now playing more competitive games because teams didn't take them seriously. Whatever the reason, it doesn't even matter. And all of a sudden, Tyus Jones, who I think made our buy low list, somewhere in that range, you go back and look at all those different podcasts on the old feed, he started climbing the board. Little by little by little, climbing the board. And all of a sudden, there he was, finished at number 67 on a per-game basis. I had him at 54 per game, which frankly, if they hadn't gotten blown out it wasn't 55% of their games when all was said and done, but it was like 20 to 30% of their games, he probably would have been right around number 54. Yank the blowouts out, he was probably right around that mark. Now, where I was off a little bit is I thought he'd play just a little bit deeper into the season before getting shut down. He ended up with 66 games under his belt. I thought he was probably going to get to 69, 70. So, yeah, I mean, splitting hairs a little bit, but when you're in that range, the range that we just talked about for Tyus, an extra couple of games basically would have gotten him to our ranking. Instead, he finished at 74 by total, so a few games back of his per game mark. He legitimately was about 4 games away from being in the 50s because everybody's so close together in there. I'm trying to think of a nice way to run the comparison. Like, you can look at somebody else who had a per game marker. Let's just do this while we're on air. Actually, this is worth figuring out. What would a couple more games have meant? So Tyus Jones was number 67, as we just talked about, in 66 ball games. Devin Vassell was number 68. He played 68 games. He finished, by the way, by totals, 8 spots ahead of Tyus Jones. 2 games, 8 spots. And that's what we're talking about here. So if Jones played in 4 more games, it wouldn't be 16 spots, but it wouldn't be all that much off of that. It would probably have been about 14, and that puts him at rank 60, 59, 60, somewhere in that neck of the woods. So that was it. That was where we were off. What's the lesson learned? Maybe don't think a tanking team player is going to get to 70 ball games. It's hard to know, though, because, Jordan Poole did. Seemed like for sure he'd get shut down, but he was so bad all year that he must have convinced him he wanted to keep going. He played in 78 ball games. Kuzma didn't. He got into 70. He got into 70, though. So if Tyus Jones got to 70, we would have nailed it. What's the lesson? I don't know if there was one. Klay Thompson. This is one I think we can officially call a miss. Klay he wasn't good. He wasn't good this year. He's lost more than one step. Did manage to play in 77 ball games, so that's something, but he finished at number 106 by totals, or by averages, I should say. 18 points, 3.5 3-pointers a game, 3.5 boards, 2.3 assists. All that stuff was relatively consistent. 43% from the field, 93% at the free throw line. And that was really the issue for Klay. And I think we can probably put it on just a lack of lift in his game anymore. He doesn't have the legs he once had. So this 45% career shooter just isn't that anymore. Basically, since the catastrophic injuries that knocked him out back in whatever that was, 2019 playoffs. Is that what it was? Missed 2 years. One injury after the other. Came back for the second half, not this season, not the one before, but the one before that, and shot 43%. And then last year he shot 43.5%, and this year he was at 43.2%. My hope with Klay was that number would tick back up to 45, 46 as he kind of got his legs back underneath him. But I think we can just sort of safely say his legs are not going to get back underneath him. He went from a 41, 42, 43% three-point shooter to 39. Free throws are good. Better even, honestly. Rebounds are slightly down, but that's mostly because minutes were down. Steals were down, but that's, again, largely because his minutes were down. This was a guy who played 33, 34 minutes a game prior to his massive injuries. And then this year, some of it was coming off the bench. Some of it was just old man situation. He was at 29 and change, just under 30 minutes a ball game. So if you look towards the future, because again, I think we can safely say that taking Klay at 80 didn't really work out. Although, you could split hairs and say because he was pretty durable, in quotes, he was number 72 by total. So he actually beat his totals mark. I had him at 62 by totals. I wasn't off by that much, but I had his per game off by a ton. I thought he was going to be a per game near 50 guy because I thought he was going to get his 17, 18 shots. Jordan Poole gone. It seemed like his role was actually going to be safer. And instead, he lost about 20% of his shots and about 15% of his minutes per game and his role in the starting lineup. And for the Warriors, it's just sort of smacked him in the face that it was time to go younger. I do think there's a weird universe, and I don't know where Klay's going to be next season. I do think there's a weird universe where he ends up as kind of like an after a bad year value, like he gets drafted near 100 this season. You're like, all right, well, it doesn't take that much to get him to 14 shots a game. Maybe he drives angry next season and just has a slightly better per game performance. He'd be a guy that you could probably take around 100 with a relatively safe floor and some ceiling that we've seen before, but can't really expect. But what's the lesson learned from this year? Probably just don't draft a guy who his ADP was 80, by the way. So it's not like he Like, he actually probably helped you in head-to-head leagues, believe it or not, by playing in most of their games. Roto, he very much did not. And the lesson there is probably if a guy misses 2 consecutive years with catastrophic leg injuries, you probably just don't draft him, frankly. But then you got a guy like DeAnthony Melton who, he'd always had little things, little nagging knee, back kind of stuff, and then his back became a huge issue this year. And that was a massive downer because he was on his way to having a really nice season. Number 86 on a per game basis. His ADP this year was 109, so he was beating it by a couple of rounds. I had his per game mark at 83. I thought he was going to be a pillar of health, and he was quite the opposite. He was a crumbling sandcastle of health who could not stay healthy, could not remain on the floor, and obliterated what was otherwise going to be a really nice season. Dude was at 1.6 3-pointers a game. He was taking 9.5 shots a game. That was the number that we really wanted to get him to, was up near 10. He was doing it. He got his free throw number up. I don't know if that was going to stick, but it was. Everything was coming up DeAnthony, and he was the guy that could step into roles anytime someone other than basically Joel Embiid went down. Anytime Maxey missed a game, Melton would start. Anytime, who the hell was their shooting guard before they traded for Buddy Hield? I don't know. Anytime a wing went down, he could sub in there, but then he just wasn't healthy. And they went out and they got Buddy Hield at the deadline and Kyle Lowry on the buyout market, and Oubre ended up playing more. And I don't know that you can point and say, here's an issue, because the previous 2 seasons, Melton played 73 and 77 games. He was just under 90% in one of them, and he was at about 93, 94% in the other. This is a guy who had 2 consecutive very healthy seasons. Admittedly, not the healthiest in Memphis the couple years before that. He missed 20 and then 12 in the previous year. 12's not all that bad. That was a COVID-shortened season. Not a one where everybody was missing games from COVID, though. So then to pop into this one and then all of a sudden miss 44 basketball games, you really could not have seen that coming. And at the same time now, it makes me pretty nervous about Melton going forward, not just because of how many games he missed, but because we're talking about a stress injury in your back. Anybody that's had back issues, and I have them, knows they don't usually just disappear. Now, if Melton falls far enough, because I don't think he'll go at 110 again. I think people are going to be pissed off about him missing half a season this year. And I think they're going to forget the fact that prior to getting hurt, he was actually putting together a pretty nice first half of the year, basically. I think his ADP is lower next year, meaning farther away from the top of the board, a higher number, a lower value. So could we see Melton going at like 125? Yeah, I think that's very possible. And I would strongly consider taking him there, because the guys that go in that range aren't usually dudes that have really good fantasy stat sets. It's usually big time flyers. And in my eyes, he's not that big of a flyer. Now, again, I have to see what happens in the offseason for Philly. But if there's a similar path next year as this season, which is like mid-20s minutes off the bench, if anybody gets hurt, he gets a bump up into the high 20s, low 30s. That's a pretty good spot to be. And the last name on the board, who dramatically outperformed what I thought was already kind of a bullish number, was Mike Conley, who had an ADP of 115 and played in 76 ball games this year. I was floored by that number. I thought for sure the Wolves were going to sort of go easy on him. And there were a few games in there where they kept his minutes down. But overall, Conley, 29 minutes a game, which I suppose you could argue that was them keeping his minutes down, just not playing him, 33 a night. 76 games played. He was number 49 by totals. He wasn't quite that good on a per game basis. Number 70 per game. And this is a guy drafted at 115 near the end of the 10th round. I thought he was going to be just inside the top 100 in both per game and totals, and he smoked those numbers. But luckily, Nobody else wanted Conley on earth, and so we got him everywhere. I had so many Mike Conleys. One of the names that was where the hell he wasn't on the old man squad when I put the list together. If I had redone the list, the old man squad list, like an hour before the NBA season started, he would have been on there. And that was Freddie VanVleet, whose ADP said one thing, but ADP stands, of course, for average draft position. We should have a different ADP that stands for actual draft position. Because in all these drafts, what is Freddie's ADP at most of draft season? Where are you, Fred? I can't find him. Where the hell's Fred? Freddie, where are you? There he is. 29 was the Yahoo preseason listed ADP for Freddie VanVleet. His total, Yahoo has 2 columns, by the way, available now if you guys want to look at any of this stuff until they close out all of the 2024 leagues, which is coming, by the way, because the finals are almost over. They have an ADP tracker, basically, of preseason ADP and all draft ADP. The all draft ADP includes Yahoo leagues that start after the first day of the NBA season. So any drafts that happen, 1 week in or halfway through or whatever it is. VanVleet's preseason ADP was 29. His all drafts ADP was 31, which doesn't feel like it tells you much, but to move 2 slots that late in the game is super significant. As a point of reference, Victor Wembanyama's preseason ADP was 25.3. His all drafts ADP was 23.7. So as insanely bullish as everyone was on Wemby after they saw him play for a couple of days, his ADP only moved 1.6. Freddie's dropped 1.9. It moved farther than Wemby's. That's an indicator of how much people at the very end of the fantasy draft season and then into the first couple weeks of the actual year were starting to fade him. And that's why the old man squad was a list I put out like a little bit less than a week, I think, before the season started. It might have been like that last weekend, so 4 or 5 days before the season started. If I had redone it 4 days later on Tuesday morning, VanVleet would have definitely been on it. Even though his ADP didn't change that much, the drafts I was doing, this has nothing to do with Mike Conley, because we'll get back to Conley in a second. The drafts I was actually doing, VanVleet was going mid to late 30s in all of them. Sometimes even later than that. I'm trying to figure out, let's see here. Where is that? Where did Freddie go in this more competitive league? Where are you, Fred? Why can't I find him? Second round? No. 4th round? Why can't I find Fred? Oh, there he is. Yeah, I mean, he went at 24 in this draft, but this is people that all listen to Sports Ethos stuff. Let's go to a Yahoo public league where I'm pretty sure I got VanVleet. And where did I get him? There we go. 4th pick of the 4th round. 40. I got him at 40 in this one. And by the way, that wasn't that crazy. So if you're wondering, where the hell is Fred VanVleet in this discussion? Well, we discussed him just now, but if you're wondering where the hell is Fred VanVleet on Yahoo's on Dan's lists, it's because his ADP was still listed at 29, even though he was going closer to 40 by the end of fantasy season. And so maybe there should be the old man squad preseason and the old man squad like opening night list. That's something. Remind me I said I was going to do that this year in case I forget. Because the guys that I had the most of on my fantasy teams this year, Mike Conley and Fred VanVleet. I had a ton of VanVleet because he fell a round farther than I expected pretty much everywhere. And Conley, because I was like, this MFer is a good point guard, and he's getting drafted at the end of the 10th round. No one has any hope for poor Michael. Anyway, in terms of lessons learned, I mean, Conley will probably go a little bit earlier next year, and he probably won't be quite as good, but I don't know that there's that much reason to like big time adjust. His role is what it is on that Minnesota team. They're way better when Conley is just quietly steering the boat. The thing I'd be a little worried about with Mike is, do the steals come down from 1.2 down to like 0.9? Even if they do, he probably only falls from, 70th to like 85th. So it still feels like in 9-cat, Conley is a pretty safe bet to land between 80 and 105. And that's actually extremely useful, especially from a guy who gives you guard stats and someone that you can probably draft again outside of the top 100. You think Conley's just going to magically get drafted inside the top 100 next year? I don't think so. There are going to be plenty of other shiny dudes that move past him, I think. Maybe not. Shout out to Dem Birds. Finally found the live stream. You're right, Dem Birds. I'm happy that you finally found it, and I hope that you're not the only one who's finally finding it. I think this is just going to be the way it goes for the first couple months that this new show exists, which is just under a month young now, is that people are going to be like taking a month off from fantasy or 2 months off from fantasy or whatever it is, and then they're going to tune back in and they're going to be like, wait, where the hell's Dan? And then hopefully they're going to come find it. So again, a reminder, no live streams on Twitter. If any of you were wondering if that's coming back, it's probably not. If you want to watch live, it'll be on YouTube. If you don't care about listening after the fact, iTunes, Spotify, those are the easiest places to get it, but obviously it's available anywhere that traditional podcasts can be found. Please, please, please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe in some order. Every single one of you is of critical importance right now, because you go from thousands and thousands of downloads to 0 overnight. I promise you, yes, you, if you're like, Dan, are you talking to me? Yes, I'm talking to you. If you take 6 seconds today to go like something, whether it's YouTube video or a tweet or whatever, or subscribe to something, I will notice and I will be very grateful. And if you have about 60 extra seconds to drop a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify, that would also be lovely as well. Nothing else to promo here other than oneself. That was the guard list from the Old Man Squad this last season. By and large, pretty good. Conley, big win. Maxey, huge win. Kyrie got the per game right. Totals wrong. Jones, honestly, pretty damn close on both. And then Melton, Klay Thompson, winner by totals, loser per game, kind of the flip. And then Melton, big injury. That's the one that hurts, because that one would have been a pretty good one if he doesn't go down for half the year. The guard's probably the most successful of the Old Man Squad list, because 5 out of the 6 names here, even Melton, frankly, per game, you could argue all 6 of these guys had some sort of positive attached to them. And then 2 out of the 6 were gigantic winners. And obviously by totals, Melton was not. But overall, pretty good. Want to get through the wings. That's probably going to be a 2-show deal. And then the totals, guys, is probably 1. So we probably got about 3 shows left looking back at some of the calls from this last year. When those are going to come, I don't know. Maybe we'll do one tomorrow. Maybe we'll go to Bed Bath & Beyond. I don't know if there will be time. I'm Dan Besbris. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball of the Old Man Squad Sports Network. Shout out to everybody that's been reaching out. Got some very cool news over the weekend. I hope that I can break that news soon. I will know more on that by the end of the week. And honestly, between now and then, just look for more shows on the Old Man Squad Sports Network. They're popping up left and right, and there should be a couple more this week coming as well. Follow at Old Man Squad on Twitter for updates on my new network. And I will talk to you all again tomorrow. I'm Dan Besbris. See you then.